Okay, good morning, everybody. This is the fourth lecture, and the fourth lecture is looking at pricing as a strategy in managerial economics. Okay, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the PowerPoints, and we're going to take you through the aims and objectives of this lecture. The first aim is to help students acquire an appreciation of a variety of pricing strategies. And the second aim is to help students appreciate why pricing has such a pervasive influence on our daily lives. The objectives of this lecture are as follows. First, to help students understand why profit maximization at the divisional level is not an optimal policy with transfer pricing. The second objective is to understand how price discrimination can result in socially optimal levels of output. And finally, we want to understand situations where price discrimination can be beneficial in other ways. I should bring it to your attention that this lecture is in two parts. The first part of the lecture is concerned with transfer pricing, and the second part of the lecture is concerned with price discrimination. Okay. So what I need to do is I need to share my screen and go to the whiteboard. Okay. And what we know from lectures 1 and 2 is that the socially optimal pricing is always given when price is equal to marginal cost, because that generates allocative efficiency. And we're also dealing with the situation where price is equal to minimum long run average cost. So those two conditions are required for socially optimal pricing. And we're going to exclude any situation where there might be positive or negative externalities. So the first condition is that price equals marginal cost, that is allocative efficiency. And the second condition is that at the profit maximizing level of output, price is equal to the minimum of long run average cost. And that assures us that production of that output could not occur at any lower possible cost. So that is the socially optimal conditions for pricing. But what about what is privately desirable? Well, we know that if a firm has some degree of market power and barriers to entry, then it is always going to set price greater than marginal cost. And because there is some degree of market power, it is always the case that price in the long run will exceed minimum long run average cost. Okay, and another point which is related to this is that if you look in your textbooks, you may sometimes see reference to what is called X in efficiency. And what that means is that in a monopoly, there is no guarantee that firms will operate on the lowest possible long-run average cost. If you consider a monopoly, it's got considerable barriers to entry, very little competition. So the firm may decide to pursue what is called the quiet life and not get too worried about being as efficient as possible, because its monopoly power means it can raise prices, restrict output, and generate an acceptable return simply by abusing its monopoly power. Now, in situations of this, when you're dealing with a monopoly, there is a need for government, GVT, government intervention. And we will look at that. Government intervention to regulate prices. And we will look at that later on in lecture 5. Okay. So I'm now going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to go back to the PowerPoints. So, as I said, the first thing we're going to look at is transfer pricing. Now, transfer pricing refers to the pricing decisions that are taken within a firm. Okay, so a firm will have multiple units of operation, multiple plants, and we can think of these plants perhaps as being vertically integrated. So Ford Motor Cars produces cars. These cars require steel, they require plastic, they require glass, they require tires, they require gearboxes, engines, etc. And some of these products will be produced by Ford itself in separate divisions. So, for example, there will be maybe a steelwork which produces the car frame, and the steelwork has to decide at what price to sell the car frame to the next stage of production within Ford, which might be assembling the gearbox. Okay, so we're interested in the internal price that the steel factory that is owned by Ford sells that basic car frame to the next stage of production within the Ford company. Transfer pricing is really only a concern for large-scale, vertically integrated firms. And these may be what are called M-form, which refers to multi-divisional corporations. There's an error in that slide. It should not be multinational, it should be multi-divisional corporations. But it can also be applied to what are called U-form or unitary types of corporations. There may be a global element in this. So, for example, the different stages of production may be located in different countries, or they may all be located in the same country. Now, two things to emphasize. If the transfer pricing is not done properly, then first, it will lead to suboptimal levels of output in each division, with the result that the firm cannot maximize its profits. And secondly, it can affect the allocation of profits and capital between the different divisions. So I think it's useful at this stage if I simply share my screen and draw this on a whiteboard. So just let me erase all this from the previous. Okay, and Let me go back to share screen, click on whiteboard. Okay, so to give you an example of this, let's say, for example, we take Ford Motor Car Company or any other big multi-divisional company. So you will have Ford, and Ford will have, for example, a steelwork, and that steelwork produces the chassis for the car. It will then have a separate division which is called assembly. Okay, and at assembly, that is where the steel frame is assembled into a car. That is where the tires are put on, the gears are put on, transmission, braking, everything else. And that all then goes forward to the paint division, which means what it says, the car gets painted and finished off. And the floor of production is from the steelwork to the assembly to paint. And then, of course, the car is then ready for sale. So each stage of production, stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, each of these operations, each of these plants is producing an intermediate product. Okay, it is intermediate in the sense that the product is not fully finished. When I go to a car showroom, I don't want to buy the car chassis. I don't want to have to take the chassis home and put the gearbox in myself and the tires and paint the car. I don't have the ability to do that. It makes sense for me to buy the finished product, which is the car. So each of these units decides what price to sell the car chassis from stage 1 to the assembly division. The assembly division puts in the gearbox, the tires, the glass, brakes, and so on. And it then has to decide what price to sell that to the paint division. And the paint division then has a cost of putting on the paint of the car and polishing it up before the final car is assembled. So that's basically the idea. Now, transfer pricing generates its own set of problems. The first issue is how much should the production division charge to the distribution division for selling the intermediate output, and vice versa for the final product. Should the production division be required to produce whatever is demanded by the distribution division, which would be an aspect of price taking, or should it be free to sell on the external market? If there is an external market, is it competitive or monopolistic? And this particular point is relevant to whether it is more profitable for the production division to sell the product externally or internally. And all of these issues are fundamental to the problem of what is known as internalization. Okay, so let's just look at that from a different angle. Let me just erase this. Oh, actually, don't erase that. Let's leave this as forward. So the issue is the steelwork produces the car chassis. It sells the car chassis to the assembly units. The assembly units then assemble the gearbox and the transmission, and then the car is then sold on to the paint division where the car gets painted. Now, to just explain and elaborate a little bit on the previous slide, should everything the steelwork produces be sold to the assembly division? Or can the steelwork sell some of the car chassis to assembly and sell some of the car chassis to an external market, i.e. buyers who are not associated with the Ford company? And the issues that affect the steelwork affect the assembly division and affect the paint division. So just to keep this that discussion simple, we are going to assume that our company has only got two divisions. The first division is PROD, production or manufacturing, and the output of this production division is then sold to a distributor, DIST. So we've got a simple company here. One part of the company makes all the car. The final car is then sold to the distribution division, and the distribution division then sells the cars to the final consumer. Okay, that's the basic idea. Now, if we go into PowerPoint, we arrive at the key criterion for transfer pricing. And the key criterion for transfer pricing is that production levels in each division should be consistent with profit maximization for the entire firm. Maximization of profits at the divisional level does not maximize profits at the company level. Okay? So, if we look at it using the simple diagrams before, if the production division wants to maximize its profits, its own profits, then it will sell its output at the maximum possible price to the distribution division. That extra price is part of the costs that the distribution division has to incur to get the car. And the consequence of that is that when the car gets sold from distribution to the final retailer, i.e. the consumer, that means that the car is going to be very expensive because production division wishes to maximize its profits, so it charges a high price. This price has to be paid by the distribution division, and the distribution division not only has to pay the high cost of production, but it has to pay its own costs of distributing and getting the car ready for the showroom. So the end result is that the final price to the retailer and the final consumer is very, very high. Now, if all of these divisions are owned by Ford, the pricing and output decisions of each unit, each distribution, each activity, activity 1 and activity 2, these two divisions should set prices and output which maximize Ford's profits. Profits for the company as a whole, not the profits of each individual division. So, what we're going to do is we're going to show you this in a diagram. And I've updated the PowerPoint on the canvas. Okay, so if we go to figure 1, what you've got here is figure 1, and that is a diagram with which we are very familiar. And in this diagram, we have made no distinction between the production division and the distribution division. All we have in this diagram are the firm's costs, the cost to the firm as a whole, which represent the cost of distribution and the cost of manufacturing. And we know from lecture 1 and lecture 2, if that is marginal cost, the firm sets marginal cost equal to marginal revenue. That gives you this profit that gives you a profit maximizing level of output Q star, and that output is then sold at price P star because that output can be sold at this price on the demand curve, which is the average revenue function. Okay, so that's straightforward. What happens then if we look at figure 2? I'll just move this out the way a bit so it's a bit easier to understand. What we have here is a more complex diagram. Let me just take you through it again. As before, we have the marginal cost of the firm here, and the demand curve facing the firm, and the marginal revenue of the firm, which is here. So the firm sets its total marginal revenue equal to its marginal cost, and that gives you the profit maximizing level of output of Q star as before. And that total output is sold at price P star. But what you notice in this diagram are that we have two marginal costs. We have the marginal cost of the firm, and we have the marginal cost of manufacturing. And the marginal cost of manufacturing is equal to the marginal cost of the firm minus the marginal cost of the distribution division. So you see then that the marginal cost of the manufacturing division, MFG, must be below the marginal cost of the firm as a whole, because marginal cost of manufacturing does not include the marginal cost of distribution. Okay. Now, if you look down here, we see we've got two marginal revenue curves. We've got the marginal revenue of the firm, and we have an associated marginal revenue curve, which is the marginal revenue curve for distribution is equal to the firm's marginal revenue minus the marginal cost of distribution. Okay, and that there, this marginal revenue function here is known as the net marginal revenue function for the distribution division. And what you notice is that the marginal cost of the manufacturing division is equal to the marginal revenue of the distribution division. And those 2 points coincide exactly at the profit maximizing level of output, which is Q star. Okay. Now, what this is saying is that the net marginal revenue function of distribution intersects the marginal cost of production exactly at the profit maximizing level of output for the firm as a whole. This must always occur when there is no external market. In other words, there is no opportunity for the production division or the manufacturing division to sell its output to an external buyer. Okay, so let me go back here. That's not what I want. So what you get is a basic relationship, a fundamental relationship. And we start off with this first condition, which we know, which is that the marginal revenue of the firm should equal the marginal cost of the firm. That was shown in diagram 1. Okay. The second part says that the marginal revenue of the firm minus the marginal cost of the distribution division is equal to the marginal cost of the firm minus the marginal cost of distribution, which of course is equal to the marginal cost of manufacturing. The marginal cost of the firm minus the marginal cost of distribution equals the marginal cost of manufacturing. So in the absence of an external market for the intermediate product, the correct transfer price is based on the marginal cost of production. And let's just look at figure 2. What you notice is that PT is the transfer price at which the manufacturing division sells the intermediate product to the distribution division. PT intercepts the marginal cost of the manufacturing division at that point there, and that is associated with the marginal revenue of the distribution division. Now, the transfer price is substantially below the final selling price of the product. And the reason for that is that the transfer price ignores the marginal costs of distribution. So what you're looking at is the final retail price of the product exceeds the transfer price. That makes sense. Why does it exceed the transfer price? It exceeds the transfer price because the final product is sold to consumers, whereas the intermediate product is sold internally at a transfer price, which is shown here. Okay. Now, one of the things I should emphasize is that if you look at the diagrams in the standard textbook, Lipchinsky, Goddard, and Wilson, you will find that some of those diagrams become very complex. So the choice of whether you wish to use diagrams or whether you wish to use a numerical example is up to you. But these diagrams that I have shown are just to try and simplify the basic relationship, assuming there is no external market. But the recommended text, Lipchinsky, Goddard, and Wilson, or any other suitable text, will cover transfer pricing using slightly different diagrams. Now, does this relationship, we know it works in the form of a diagram, but can it be shown to work mathematically? And the answer is yes, it can. So let's assume that we're looking at the firm as a whole. So the inverse demand curve is price is equal to 100 minus Q. That is the demand curve facing the firm as a whole. And total cost function is 70 plus 10Q plus 1.5Q squared, which is the firm's total cost function. And that, of course, the total cost is comprised of the marginal cost of manufacture and the marginal cost of distribution. So we know profit maximization requires that marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So from the total revenue curve, we can calculate marginal revenue. Differentiating this function gives us marginal cost. And if you do the calculations, you'll find that the profit maximizing level of output is 18 units, and that can be sold at a price of 82 pence on the final market. So that is straightforward for the firm as a whole. And if we look at how this works out by division, manufacturing division and distribution, then what we've done is we're going to specify a total cost function for the manufacturing division, which is shown by the subscript M, and that is equal to 50 plus 7Q plus 0.5Q squared. And we have here a total cost for the distribution division shown by subscript D, and that is equal to 20 plus 3Q plus Q squared. Now I've got here a note which says note the sums. Okay, so 20 plus 50 is 70. 70 is there, showing that's total cost there. 3Q plus 7Q is 10Q. 10Q is there. And Q squared plus 0.5Q squared gives us 1.5Q squared. And that, of course, is shown by that term there. So the sums of the total cost of the manufacturing division and the total cost of the distribution division equal to the sum of the firm's total cost function, which is shown here. Okay, we require that the marginal revenue of the firm minus the marginal cost of distribution. We need to find the marginal revenue of the firm minus the marginal cost of distribution. That yields us that relationship. Marginal revenue of production has to equal the marginal cost of production for profit maximization. And if you calculate this out, you'll see that that condition is held when Q is equal to 18. And if we insert 18 into the firm's demand function, we get price equal to 82. So price is equal to 100 minus 18. 18 is the optimal output, so the resulting price is 82, and you get the same result when you calculate it by production and manufacturing division. So that is an overview of transfer pricing. I'm going to stop this first part of the lecture, and when I come back, we're going to look at price discrimination. Thank you.